I'd like to thank Deanna for being our liturgist, and also for Deanna and all the choir singing that wonderful anthem. It's such a message, and it's trust and obey. Now, our closing hymn is Trust and Obey, and that was Jane Knight's favorite hymn. And for some of you who did not know Jane Knight, she had been a school teacher and retired, came back here, and she would be a substitute organist at our church, and she would teach reading in the library, helping people to read through the reading link. It was so many ways in service, and now at the college, the Jane Knight Auditorium is named after her. It's Jane Knight Auditorium there at the Kaskaskia College, and there are scholarships named after her. And the one point I want to make, and I hope you can pick this up in today's message, is this. We're blind to some things. There's some things we can't see. And I'm going to tell you right off, one thing you can't see. Now I want to get it into the message. One thing that you and I can't see, we don't see, we have no idea of the impact we've made on other people. I mean, if you heard it all, you would be greatly surprised. I was surprised a couple weeks ago when a minister emailed me and said, Pastor Ed, you're one of the reasons I became a minister. I don't know why I should thank you or blame you. I was astonished. I never talked to the guy like that. But his dad was a very great pastor, very, very great pastor. And in the church that his dad served, a war sprung up, like we've seen some wars spring up in congregations in this town. And it was so awful that this pastor, this gentleman, when he was a teenager, was thinking of becoming a minister. But it was so awful there, and he saw his dad suffer so much, and perhaps the people of the church suffer. It was so bad that one son never went to church again. That was it. Never went back to church after his experience. And this one became a minister. And I said, I never talked to you about this. We played volleyball at Synod School at Hanover College. He was a great guy, but what did I do? He said, Pastor Ed, you were an experienced pastor of 9 years, working in a church for 9 years, and you were still happy. He got the idea. You could be happy and be a pastor. And that was my gift to him. I was just floored. And he's a wonderful pastor. His congregation loves him. I could see that when I visited his church. It was really great to see that. But what I'm trying to tell you is this. You've made an impact. You've made a big impact, and you have no idea of the lives you've touched. And one way, that's where we're blind. Another possibility of our own blindness is that we could be spiritually blind to really realize how much you are loved and I'm loved. And that's the key to life. It's love. And you are really, really loved. And I see that. I've seen it hundreds of times at funerals. I'll come by. Oh, your grandpa was a big inspiration to me, or whatever it was. Your grandma was just a saint for me. And all these wonderful things that people are saying. And I kind of wish they heard it, and I always encourage people, I preach this in the fall, tell them before they go if you can. But if you can't, that's okay too. But we have a sense of gratitude toward these. But you have no idea of how much you're loved and the impact you have made. And we all, unless the Lord returns, go to heaven one day, but we don't know that we made such an impact. So anyway, I want to talk now about a tunnel. And the tunnel was discovered in 1880. And Elza Allen's an expert on this. He has Archaeology Digest. In 1880, they discovered a tunnel in Jerusalem, and it was built by King Hezekiah. And he was worried about the Assyrians to the north, and you ought to be worried about the Assyrians. When they captured you, they were so proud of what they did, they put it on their walls in stone. They skinned people alive. You're still alive, and they're taking off all your skin. They were just vicious. They wanted you to surrender right away. And Hezekiah had to get ready for an attack, and he built a tunnel, and it's an amazing engineering feat. He built it on the outside of the city and on the inside, and somehow, way back then, they figured out how to meet in the middle. I'm going, these people are smart. And it became a pool at one end. And on my pilgrimage to the Holy Land, we had a chance to go to the pool of Siloam that we talked about in our scripture reading today. And our guide has to unlock a gate. They keep a lot of these places locked up. And we go down a lot of steps. We go way, way down, and there's a tiny stream about this deep going through. And that came through the tunnel from a spring, and that was used to help people with water. Now, when I was there, when the guide, we read this scripture, then they went up, and one minister went down and grabbed a piece of clay. I go, oh boy. I grabbed a piece of clay too. Somebody had brought pottery hundreds of years ago and broke it and left it there. So I had something to remind me of the pool of Siloam. And here's the miracle. The miracle is that people were spiritually blind, and I'll explain that in a minute. There is a man who is blind, and he's begging, and the disciples had no emotional intelligence. Sometimes we lack emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is this. If I say something, how will people react? If I said, if a husband says to the wife, you're wearing that, there's an emotional cost. There's a cost to that. And the guy might have no idea. And so the disciples have no emotional intelligence. The guy's begging, he has this bowl for money, and they're saying, Jesus, who messed up? Who sinned? This guy or his mom, or was it his dad that sinned and he was born blind? They thought if bad things happened to you, it was because of sin. And that was the theology of that day. And if you wanted to see who God loved, just look to Bill Gates. Whoever had the most money, God liked the most. And it kind of made sense for them. But there they are. Here's the guy listening to this. Who sinned? I didn't have a chance to sin. I was born blind. Mom and Dad are pretty good, you know. And Jesus says this, neither. Now, this is going to explain a lot of things. But Jesus now says, he was not, God didn't do that to him. But whatever a person's existence, whether it's a person who has been born with severe handicaps, whatever the situation of life, God uses everybody to show his glory. God uses everybody to show his glory. And if I have a 90-year-old in a nursing home, why doesn't God take me? I'm tired of being here. The answer is that God could show his glory through you or me while we are alive. That's a very important distinction to understand, that your purpose is to be somehow, as Jesus says, I'm the light of the world, but now you're the light of the world. Our job is to let the light shine, and that's our purpose. And whether we let the light shine when we're in a tough circumstance or a happy circumstance, our job is to let the light shine. Now, Jesus does something that kind of grossed me out as a kid. Being a preacher's kid, I heard this story a number of times. Jesus spits. Now, back then, spit's not a bad thing. If you spit in Singapore, you're going to go to jail. But Jesus spit, took some clay off the ground, put it together, pulled up the guy's eyelid, and put this clay on the guy's eyes, on both eyes. Then he says this, go to the pool of Siloam. Don't go to where the water's coming out in a faucet someplace. They would have springs coming up from places. No, you go to the pool of Siloam and you wash right there. Now, why would you wash in the pool of Siloam? Well, you might go back to Hezekiah and think about how he built that. And when they found that inscription on that tunnel with the water going through, this is Hezekiah's tunnel. It kind of reminds you of what things that can be done. Well, anyway, he goes there and he washes his eyes and he can see. We sang, "Open my eyes that I might see." And now we end up with a different dilemma. When Jesus touches your life, there's also trouble coming. That trouble. When Jesus touches our lives, there's trouble. He runs into trouble. Jesus healed him on the Sabbath day, and the Pharisees, who think they have all the rules of God, are upset that he was healed on the Sabbath day. Jesus should have not done that on Saturday. He should have done it on Sunday, the first day of the week, not on the Jewish Sabbath, Saturday, the day of when God rested. And so he's in trouble there. And when the Pharisees go after his parents, they're saying, "Hey, he's of age, go talk to him." He may be in trouble with his family. I kind of wonder if some of the begging money got diverted to the family. And thirdly, he's got a real problem. He's an adult, and he can't beg. He can't do what he did all his life since a little kid. He's got to learn something new and somehow make a life for himself. So when we turn to Jesus, we got things to do too. We got things to do, and that's in that song, "Trust and Obey." And it may be difficult to trust Jesus, and it may be difficult to obey Jesus. And I want to share an illustration I've shared before that my dad gave me. It was from a book published in 1952. The story comes probably from the early 1940s, and I love Dr. Norman Vincent Peale. I went to his very first workshop for ministers, and I heard about it, and they sent out a letter invitation. So I wrote, "Can I come?" And I was the only one to ask to come. He says, "Okay, you can come." And on the opening evening for the big banquet, there was an empty chair next to him. I sat there. I was just a young pastor, new pastor, and he was so gracious and so kind. He was a very, very humble person, and he was just so great. And his church at Marble Collegiate was just a packed place. And when he was doing the power of positive thinking, it was a time after the Great Depression when people were very discouraged. So he was trying to teach the people, hey, with Jesus you can do things. We could rebuild this city. We can get a lot done. And he had a very positive people there. He had people who had been on welfare and listening to the message decided to get a career and go to work. And so it was just a lot of inspiration. But he had a person in church on the front row of this crowded church who looked awful. Now, when Dan Kingery speaks in churches, he can look around at the audience and you see different expressions. It could look like this, or looking at the sky, shaking their wad, different things. They have different behaviors. And we see it all. And Dr. Peale said it was so bad, he didn't want to look at this guy with the saddest, awfulest frown, just negative pouring out of him. And he had to kind of look at other happier people to preach. And so finally the guy comes into his office one day and says, "Dr. Peale, all those people in church are happy except me. Are they really happy?" And Dr. Peale says, "I believe most of them are happy." Well, I want to tell you why I'm not happy. And he goes on and talks about 5 competitors in his business and how awful they are. And he enumerates all their faults, one by one by one by one. And Dr. Peale is listening to that and heard all the trouble. He hated these people. And the guy said, "They're just no good crooks." Well, Peale listened to this, and he got really wise. He said, "Let's talk about you for a minute and not your business competitors. Let's talk about you." And that's what Jesus does. He talks about you and me. Are we going to trust Jesus? And we're going to see if this guy trusts Peale. And Peale says this, You told me you were miserable. I've been sitting here trying to diagnose your case, and I believe I have it. I have it. I know what would make you happy, but you won't do it. That's Jesus. Jesus knows what would make us happy, but we won't do it. Oh, this is so beautiful. And Peale went on, I know you won't do it. I could tell you what would make you happy, and you could just get away from being miserable, and you'd be like all the other people in church, you'd be happy. But you won't do it. Huh. Dr. Peale, I will do it. Now tell me what it is. I promise you I'll do it. That's a mistake. It's not easy, but Jesus gives us. Peale answers, well, it's this. Every night, get down on your knees and say your prayers. And call all your competitors by name, Charlie, John, whatever it is. Call them by name and ask God to bless them and give them more business next year than God gives you. He stormed back. I'm not going to do anything of the kind. And aren't we like that? I remember Dan told me one time he was listening to the Bible on a long trip, and he's listening to the book of Jonah, and God says, Jonah, go this way. And Jonah does, he goes this way. He goes, I'm not going to do it. And that's our spiritual situation. I am not going to do it. Well, Peale says, well, I told you you wouldn't do it. Yes, the man said, I told you I would, didn't I? But I think you took advantage of me and played a trick on me, and he stormed out. So Dr. Peale notices, week after week, that frown beginning to lessen. What's going on here? And finally, he's smiling in church. Peale said, I could see the transformation in his face. And one day he came back to my office. Dr. Peale, your prescription works all right. I had lunch with 3 of them today, and I'm going to have lunch with the other 2 next week. They are pretty fine fellows. I had no idea they were that fine. But he said, Dr. Peale, I got a confession to make. For a long time after I went away from your office, when I got down and said my prayers, did what you asked, I prayed for God to bless each one of them, give them more business than He gave me next year. I stopped right there, opened my eyes, looked up and said, God, you know I don't mean a single word of that. But he was obeying, wasn't he? He could trust Peale and he could obey. And he goes on to say, but I got to where I did, and I'm still praying for them, and I'm happy. I'm happy. You see, the love we want is already within our hearts. It's just a matter of letting it out. It's not there or here. It's not in form of having a huge yacht or whatever it is, having a private airplane. It's inside. That's where the happiness, the spiritual happiness, the lasting happiness resides. And as we trust Jesus and bless others, and I shared this before, but I want to share it again. There are church fights. And one time my dad was in a church fight. He had a big church in Coatesville, Pennsylvania, and he was on radio, all kinds of things. But he had a church fight in the session. The session is the ruling elders, and one elder had a great idea of taking the house across the alley, evicting their residents, and turning it into a scout house. That's a good idea, a scout house. Now, one resident was 90 years old, and the other was 92 on the top floor, and that was Dad's dad, that's his dad, who was very domineering. And Dad just said, hey, no way, we can't evict these people, they're too old, And the guy got mad, stormed out. And I said, Dad, You're in that town. What do you do when you see that person? What do you do? How do you handle that? Ed, I'd be walking down the main street of Coatesville, and they'd see me. They'd cross over on the other side of the street. And what'd you do next, Ed? I shot him a blessing. Lord, bless that person. No, he wasn't wrong. He had a good idea. It just wasn't going to fit. Bless that person. And that's what Jesus says. Bless those who curse you. Bless them. And what's the benefit? It's not for them. For us. We get a happier face. And when Dan speaks here next time, we'll all look happier. And that's why we trust and obey. Amen.